Hey, what is up, everybody? Preview, spoilers, teasers, whatever you want to call them. There's been about 34 teased Frostfall cards, and I want to take a look at every single one of them that has been announced. Even the ones I've already gone over in a bunch of videos and shorts, I want to just go through everything that's been shown so far in one place. And that's what this video, no particular order. I just put them all in a folder. I grabbed these all through rummaging through Discord. And we're going to start with Chains of Prometheus. 2 cost, counter rune for 2 fire. This Chains of Prometheus can only be cast when an opponent activates a counter rune, negate that rune, and that opponent returns 1 spirit from their underworld to their spirit deck. This is the counter that everyone's been looking at. Now, we know that the current meta is a counter heavy meta. Does this do anything to break the counter heavy meta? Not directly. I think it's going to be a really good card in some decks, and why I don't think it's going to be the answer that everyone was looking for is because it's still a 1-for-1 in a lot of cases. Now, you negate, let's say, a Gorgon's Gaze. Cool. You might be able to continue your effects and stuff from there. But if you're negating things like a Tsunami, they're going to basically, you're going 1-for-1. You can crack over something. You really need to get additional value out of this based on your board state. And it doesn't help you with your board state directly. So it's a little slow. And it's situational, but in the situations where it's good, it's phenomenal. The situations where it's okay to bleh, it's going to feel really bad. It's got to do a lot of work. It's got to let you get your Viserys in to continue a combat. It's got to let you maybe hit with Blazers twice. It's in fire, which is relevant. It means decks are going to have to splash for this. Kind of like splashing for like a thunderstorm or splashing for the tsunami. So it's not going to be viable in every deck because you might be spread too thin on spirits. I think that's good design. I think that really makes you kind of figure out what runes you're bringing. But it's not going to be an instant 3 of include like many of the other counter runes because it's more niche than the other counter runes. If this becomes more like played, it's going to be then slowly less played because the more this is played, the less direct counter runes might be played. It's a little bit of a balancing act. So I think it's a strong card. I think it's going to be extremely relevant, but I don't think it's as good as people expected it to be, being a counter and the meta being a counter heavy meta. It's not quite going to help every deck out. And a lot of things that this will do is kind of what Healer's Chariot Ride is already doing, which is preventing your opponent from countering your attack threats. This is mostly going to be beneficial for countering attack threats targeting things like Gorgons, maybe PTA, maybe Shield. So it's not as like instant include as I think everyone was expecting it to be. Moving on to the next card. Panzer. I've talked about this before at length. The 3/3 gets 1 defense for every earth enchanting it. You can Nexus up to 2 earth. When you do, you can turn an earth from your underworld to your spirit deck or enchant that earth spirit to this Panzer. This card is really good. It is a giant wall with a Nexus effect, which is good. The only downside is it got hurt by the Nexus effect changes before this card really got to be used, which I'm not going to go into too much because I've talked about that at length. But it's a giant wall that can heal you spirits and kind of fuel your Nexus things in Earth. Maybe Clovey becomes relevant because of this. Helps you funnel more spirits on the board for things like Tectorus. It just does quite a bit on a defensive body, so it's going to be hard to get over. It's going to heal you. It's going to maybe pump your Elestrals. It's going to get spirits back on board to cast things. So it's recovery, it's defense, it's pump. It does a lot. I think it's just generally going to be a very strong card if the right Earth deck comes out for it. I don't think this goes into Earth Beaters. It's too slow for that. But you could perhaps see this go into some kind of Earth Stall deck or Earth Draw like control deck. That might exist with like Gigaflora or something along those lines going forward. We'll talk about Gigaflora again later. I think it's going to be a good card. I just don't know exactly what home it's going to go in right now. Unless maybe something like Earth Nexus becomes a thing. Even though Clovey's not quite as good as Astrabbit, Clovey still could be relevant with Panzer and Fully Forest on play. Load up tons of spirits, get tons of things going. I guess you could say this goes in a Fully Forest focused deck. Let's move on. Tower of the Winds. We saw this in A-Drive's live stream a few weeks ago, and we got the second part of the effect. We didn't have the first part effect, so it's a 1-cost Wind Invoke rune. Nexus 1 Wind to a Wind Enchanted Elestral. If you do, you may special send it to an Elestral from your hand. This card is pretty good. It is, in essence, an Invoke Tadpuff, So I think this card is worse than a Tad Puff, but also better than a Tad Puff. So it's worse than a Tad Puff because you need a Boar State to use it. You need a Nexus Bank, usually Aeolus, and a card to Nexus too, probably like a P-Gust, or maybe like a Fin Dust, or Nemesis will go into a little bit, so you get some healing, some additional effects out of it. I think a Special Send generally into a 3 cost. You could go into a 2 cost. You could go Special Send into 1 cost if you really wanted to with this card. It's going to basically allow more wind ramp stuff, and when wind is usually extremely expensive to get big threats out, this will help wind be a little bit cheaper, perhaps get some more wind Nexus synergy. I think we might see wind Nexus be a more viable deck with this card because you can just move more spirits around for cheap. That being said, what are you going into this with? You're probably going into Flammamoth, you're going maybe into Stratamoth, but with Flammamoth around, I don't know why you would. Maybe you skip to Pantera to get a cheap Pantera out so you still have spirits in play to go wide if your Pantera gets earthquaked or something. But I think you're really just going into Flammamoth with this. Maybe you're going into additional 1 cost, like you play Exaltair, Nexus 1 spirit to Exaltair off Aeolus, Towers of Winds, burn for 2, Tower of Winds, Nexus another spirit to it, special send into it, another Exaltair from hand, Nexus back to Aeolus, burn for another 2. There's like some burn Nexus combo there. So again, Wind Nexus I think is going to be where this shines. Maybe a Wind Ramp strategy shows up because of this card. Again, it's kind of like Tad Puff where you can accelerate to a 3-drop quickly or 2-drop quickly, but it's again needs more board state. So it's a combo piece most likely. I don't see this being a generic Wind card. I think it's just combo decks basically. Either you're ramping with it or you're burning with it / Nexus foddering with it of some sort. Moving on. Flammamoth, as I just mentioned. So it's a 9/4 for 2 wind and 1 fire. I love this art. This is obviously the full art. It's going to be the rare art. The normal art's floating around somewhere. Also looks great. But anyway, this Flammamoth gets 1 attack for each enchanting wind on the field. When a player activates a rune effect, you can expend 2 fire in order to negate that effect and destroy the rune. This card can be activated only once each turn. This is pretty good. So this is kind of like, if you pair this with Chains of Prometheus, your opponent can't use rune removal on things. This also can remove Divine Runes, which I think is going to catch a lot of people off guard. They're just going to try to activate their Aeolus, and their Aeolus is going to get negated and popped. It's really powerful. We have ways to accelerate it out. We don't know what the 2-cost stage of Flammamoth is, if there is one right now. But generally, this is going to be a high attack threat because you're going to have a bunch of wind on field. It's basically an 11 attack. You can't really Gorgons or PTA it or Earthquake it without having multiple forms of removal in hand. Though that 4 defense stat does make it vulnerable to things like position swaps or stat swaps. Perhaps like something like Galaxair techs into it. It dies to Boombat, it dies to Kinleo. A good enough tech Taurus might be able to just punch over this. There's ways to get over it with its lower attack stat, but it's got a really powerful effect that, in all honesty, 2 fire is expensive. Like if your opponent's throwing, runes at you over and over again, you're going to be taking a lot of fire. So you have to have a lot of fire spirits, but you also need a lot of wind spirits for the Aeolus package, for Tower of the Wind, stuff like that. So I think the deck composition is going to be difficult to get right, but if someone gets it right, this card's going to be a monster in the meta. 100%. It looks great. Moving on. Arcturus. Again, some of these are screenshots that are a little awkward. So it's a 3-something for 1 frost. The defense probably doesn't matter here because it's an aggressive body or aggressive threat based on its ability. You can spend 1 frost in order to give this Arcturus +3 attack until the end phase. This effect can be activated 2 times a turn. So this could be a 1-cost 9 spirit or 1-cost 9 attack Elestral for 2 spirits, which is pretty good for a turn. This again could potentially get over something like Flammamoth if it doesn't have a bunch of wind spirits or something, or I guess maybe not because it only goes to 9. This is a way to dump spirits into your underworld for things like Cryoling, perhaps. We'll get into Cryoling later. Is it good? Maybe. Like, for 1 spirit a turn, you can make it a 6 attack. The fact that you can't use this ability on your opponent's turn makes this card probably not good enough to see play. It definitely looks good for getting over 2s and 3s on a 1 cost, which I think is going to be relevant. It's almost like a Elestral bodied PTA where you kind of pump it up and beat over something that's higher cost than it. Other than that, that's the only ideal world I see. If 2s and 3s are more relevant and they have less than or equal to 9 attack, Arcturus will probably see play as a sideboard at least to punch over those threats. That's about all I have to say about that. Blizzard, a 2-cost invoke rune. This Blizzard cannot be changed by counter runes. You can target and destroy a face-down rune. So it's a Thunderstorm that can't be chained to, but you can't use it on Divine runes. I think Thunderstorm is better than this because you can blow up Divine runes, which are super relevant in Earth and Thunder in the meta decks right now. But I can see a world where this is useful against the counter-heavy meta. Maybe if you're going against a control deck, it's good to run this in sideboard. If you're not running Thunder in your main deck, but you're running a bunch of Frost, it's relevant against some of those more control-y decks to just pop a shield, pop a PTA, pop a Gorgons without them being able to activate it. And that's the upside. They can't activate runes in response, so if you blow up a Gorgon's Gaze, they can't respond by activating Gorgon's Gaze and negating something anyway. I think this card will be relevant, at least in the sideboard. I don't know if you're going to ever main deck this, when you might be able to just play something like Chains of Prometheus, or you're just hitting an invoke rune and it feels bad because you just spent 2 spirits to blow up like an Ambrosia bluff or something. Maybe combined with Corbrel, this could do well in like a water frost control deck if that ever comes up, where you kind of scout out everything and then blizzard away the direct threat. That might be relevant. Other than that, I don't know how much play it's going to see, but it's a very cool card design. Cutearant, a 3/1 for 1 Frost. When this Cutearant receives 1 or more Frost, you can turn 2 Frost from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. This card is amazing. It doesn't maybe not seem quite like it, but this card is going to be great in context of the other Frost cards. So to kind of preview, if you play this, it gets destroyed. You play an Frostix from your hand using its ability to special summon Cutearant back into play. Then your Cutearant heals itself back the spirits you use for Frostix to get it back into play. You still have a normal cast, so maybe then you play Frigid, and you Nexus 1 from your Kione to this, and it's another 2 heal. Now you have 2 bodies on the board. If you have Imagine of Boreas in play with all that, because you're playing a Nexus deck, you maybe want the Stadium. All of a sudden you have 2 5 attackers that you just spent basically like 2 cards for, but you gain spirits, and you have 2 5 attackers in play with the Mountain of Boreas in play. It's going to make a really interesting go-wide recursion Nexus Frost deck, I think. And we'll go into that combo a little bit more as we go into other cards in the set that we have seen so far. Cyanectar, a 1-cost Earth for 2/1, or a 4/1 cost Earth 2/1. Words. When a player casts Poison Tipped Arrow, Poison Nectar, or Poison Tunic, we have no idea what Poison Nectar or Poison Tunic are yet, you can special send this Cyanectar to Waspy from your hand or deck. Waspy is pretty good looking. It's a matter of if Poison Nectar and Tunic are playable. Playing this with Poison Tipped Arrow, still probably good enough given how good Wasp Ivy's looking. But we'll get into that more when we get to Wasp Ivy. Without knowing what the other 2 cards are, it's hard to evaluate this. But it looks like if the combo pieces are there and those 3 cards are all playable generically, this is going to be a monster. If not all those cards are playable generically, then it'll be okay to an interesting tech card maybe. Moving on. Dratagua. This is the Shadow Stars version of it because I like the art better. The normal art's floating around somewhere. So 1/4, that 4 defense is pretty relevant. For 1 water, when this Dratagua receives 1 or more water, you can turn 2 spirits from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. Similar to Cutearant, however, this is the water receive card that water didn't have in set 1 that it needed. This is going to make like Water Stall pretty high impact, I think, because you don't really need to run the Quackles as much. I think that running this with Poseidon is going to be really interesting for a potential like Galaxy aggro thing where you kind of play Galaxy, play this, Nexus, Poseidon to it, get a bunch of healing power. This will be a 4 attacker with Galaxy in play. Maybe you run Atlantis a bunch with like Aphros and do like a Water Nexus strategy to get a bunch of spirits on board. And then you have a bunch of like 5-6 attackers with Atlantis and Galaxy in play. It's going to be interesting to see where it goes. It synergizes well with its second Ascension form, Locagon, which we'll get into later. But I think this card is looking really strong. And I think it's going to be stronger than people anticipate it to be. It's pretty spicy. Moving on. Frostix, I mentioned earlier. It's a 2/3 for 1 Frost. You can expend 2 Frost Discard this, and in order to special cast an Elestral with enchantment cost 1 Frost from your Underworld. I mentioned you use this on Cutearant, making this cost free, so this is basically just a Cutearant special cast in your hand, so it kind of works like a Tadpuff. But also you can use that on any Frost Celestial. Maybe you mill out some Bobs into your Underworld and you special cast them back, or Chilotl if you want to be Heresy. Maybe you get a Frigid back into play, and then Nexus spirits around and get spirits back from your Underworld, so you're recovering the cost. The best part about this is it's basically all of its good targets will recover you some of the spirits used for this card effect, making it almost free, which is really powerful. And in a worst case scenario, you can just play it defense to stall for a turn. You can get it back with Kione too, so if you use it to, let's say, special cast Cutearant, Kione and Frost backs your hand, special cast another Cutearant. If you can fill your Underworld well, this card is going to be monstrous. If you can fill your Underworld well, right now we only have Avalanche to self-mill, which is okay, I guess. 3 cards off your top, maybe 5 cards if you have a board state. We'll see what happens if we get more self-mill. This card's going to be better. And the fact that you can recur with Kione to pull back spirits is going to make you able to make a very wide, small board in Frost from the Underworld, and then just combine it with like Mountains of Boreas. Emperor. This is probably my favorite card in the set that I've seen that I can talk about because I know stuff in the set too. Anyway, it's my favorite card in the set. Emperor. It's 11/9 for 2 Frost, 1 Thunder. When you cast this Emperor, you can Nexus all of your enchanting spirits to it. Every single spirit on your board onto this card. You can disenchant 3 spirits in any combination of Frost or Thunder from this Emperor in order to destroy every card on the opponent's field. This is a board wipe on a body. At worst, if you play this out, you can disenchant all the spirits from it and blow up the board. It's a nuclear bomb on a stick, essentially. In the right deck, though, you're basically just pulling 3 spirits off, say, Kione, and blowing up your opponent's board for it. Now, if they have a Gorgon's Gaze, you're out of luck. But you can also run Chains of Prometheus or Healer's Chariot Ride in preparation to go combo into Emperor. What do I mean combo into Emperor? If Emperor is in your hand, you have a Kione in field, and a Frostix in your hand, and a Cutearant and Frigid in your Underworld. Maybe it's like turn 4 or 5 and you kind of just let those cards go into your Underworld to set up for this. You can Frostix Cutearant into play, recover 2 spirits, net even. Use Kione to get Frostix back, get Frigid into play. Nexus with Frigid to the Cutearant, recovering 2 spirits to Cutearant, 1 spirit to Frigid. Then hard ascend Emperor over either Frigid or Cutearant. Nexus all the spirits on the board, which should be about 7 or 8, maybe a little bit more depending on how much you put on Kione or on your other board state. Then you have, let's say, 7 spirits, disenchant 3, blow up the board, attack for 4 directly, and effectively kind of do a from hand with 1 card, this crazy blow up play. If you can have 2 Kiones, you can blow up the board and hit for like 10. It's a really, really fun combo that I hope sees play because it's really cool to just be like, I do this little Frost combo late in the game and it's basically a free on spirit cost. It's just a matter of what's in your hand because of all the spirit recursion, and just go bam, board wipe. You don't have a Gorgon's Gaze, you're out of luck, punch in the face for a bunch, pass turn, see what your opponent can respond with, but they just lost maybe 3-4 cards depending on their board state. I think it's going to be really cool to see that. It looks super fun. I love this card, and I hope it's good because it's awesome. Frigid, I've talked about this a lot. It's a 1-cost Frost, 4/2. Next is up to 2 Frost. When you can enchant 1 Frost from your Underworld to this Frigid. This is the Frost Nexus card. It's pretty decent. It's basically recovering spirits to the board, which is really interesting. I think this is going to best see play in a Mountain of Boreas style deck, where you can kind of go wide, Nexus spirits, enchant stuff back to it, and make it really tall that way. Also, if your opponent doesn't have back row or something that Frigid can't beat over, this card's going to do so much damage so fast, where you play Frigid Nexus 2 off Kione to it, enchant 1 from the Underworld to it. Now all of a sudden it has 4 spirits on it and turn basically 1 or 2. And if you can punch directly for 4 spirits on turn 2, that's a really aggressive threat. Follow up behind it or before it with like Blizzards to knock out back row. I think there's going to be a really interesting Frost aggro deck focused on just piling spirits on the board and loading up little guys from your underworld as efficiently as possible with Kyone and then Frost. Really, really fun design. I think this card is looking quite good. Again, like Panzer, this got hit with the Nexus nerf, not the end of the world, but it's a pretty cool card. Moving on. Mountains of Boreas. It's the Frost Stadium. Moving on. Findust. This card's actually quite interesting. It's a 2/2 for 1 wind. You can disenchant 1 wind from this Findust in order to search your deck for a rune that costs at least wind and add it to your hand. Not 1 wind, at least wind. So you could potentially pull Aeolus. No, Aeolus. Do we have any 2-cost wind cards? No. Oh, Bag of Winds. You can search Bag of Winds with this, to be clear. Like, it has just wind in its cost, you can search it. When you cast Sandstorm, special send this Findust to Hyperfin from hand to deck. We don't know what Sandstorm is or Hyperfin yet, won't talk about that. But that first effect, disenchant wind to search for a wind invoke or wind rune in general, that's really good. So, starting, you can use this to find Aeolus. You can play Aeolus to find Findust, to find any other wind rune. So in that kind of wind Nexus interesting deck type, you could basically use Aeolus to now search for any wind rune. Searching for Tower of the Winds maybe. So if you have a board state already, let's say you played a Pegas turn 1, they haven't answered it, you can now play Aeolus, search for Findust, play Findust, disenchant Findust, find Tower of Winds, Nexus from Aeolus to Pegas, send Pegas to 3 cost in your hand or something. There's some really crazy things you can do with this card. I think it's going to be very expensive. That's on theme for wind. But this card is a menace. And if it's not a menace now, being able to search for any wind rune, it will be a menace in the future. Because searching invoke runes or searching runes in general is a very powerful effect. And being just wind runes isn't very limiting. So I think this card, if not good now, will be very good in the future. And then if Sandstorm and Hyperfin are good, then this card is going to be cracked. If not now, eventually. Galaxy, we all know that. Hiding in the corner. Galaxair is what this picture is for. It's a 1-cost wind 3/4. You can target Elestral and swap its attack with its defense until end phase. This is like a Sorlet that you can use on your own Elestrals, but it has way worse stats, so you can also not have to spend wind to use its effect. I don't know where to rate this in vein of like Sorlet and Galaxy effects. I think it's going to be a good card. It's probably going to be pretty good as a tech card against things like Earth Beatdown with their Viserys's or 5 attack, because swapping 5 attack stats will put them in really low defenses. I think at worst this card is going to be a tech card against like aggressive 5 attack style strategies, and at best it's going to be a really good powerhouse tech card that you just search off Toolbox Aeolus basically. So I think it'll always see play. I just don't know where, or rather how many you'll see play in the main deck versus side deck versus, I don't think you're ever going to play 3 of, but a 1 of I see easily with Aeolus to just get over small aggressive threats and maybe mess with your opponent's damage calculations, stuff like that. Gigaflora, great name. 4/7 for 2 Earth. You can expend Earth in order to target and special send Gigaflora to this Gigaflora. So this is a quick ascend off of Gigaflora. Gigaflora being a very bad card, but now there's a reason to play it with Gigaflora because Gigaflora is a very good card. So you can special send from Gigaflora to Gigaflora during your main phase. During your draw phase, you can special cast a 1 Spirit Earth Celestial from your underworld. So now you can recur your Gigaflora, but this card's going to be best if you can stick it in play and keep it on board. You can start recovering Tectauruses into play, Viserys's into play. This is a threat that you need to answer immediately, or it's going to just start dropping more threats on the board where all of a sudden you're going to be stuck in the situation of, I need to remove Gigaflora and this Viserys and this Tectaurus at the same time, but I only have 1 removal card in my hand at the moment. It's going to be really interesting. Now, generally this will get removed immediately the second you can, because again, it'll just start dropping threats from your underworld into play, making multiple threats on board. But this card's really cool. As long as it's a stay on board, it's going to be really powerful. But with removal like Earthquake in play, Poison to Barrow perhaps, it's going to be rough. But once you can stick this card, if you maybe need to run Helios Chariot Ride to cement this card into play, do that. And then this card's just going to be a monster once you get the proper setup, especially with something like Palelithic to search for stuff and dump into Underworlds, all that jazz. I think Gigga is going to see some play, maybe in the Panzer deck, maybe in a fully forest kind of weird control deck. Gigga I think is a great card. Kione, we talked about Kione a bunch. Obviously, it's the Frost Divine Rune, and I'm on the fence about it. I think the best part about it is that you load up Frost Spirits into it, and it combos them Frost Sticks. So when you cast this Kione, you can enchant up to 3 Frost to it, standard Divine Rune stuff. You can disenchant Frost from it to return a 1 Spirit Frost Celestial from your Underworld to your hand. So if you use this for Frost Sticks, you're getting a special cast out of it. If you use it on anything else, you're recurring, I don't know, maybe a Chalotl, maybe a Frigid, maybe you just don't have a ton of Elestrals ready to go in hand. Returning to hand is not great, but you can compare this to Aeolus. Aeolus searches deck for 2 costs, it searches Underworld for 1. So if you can fill up your Underworld, which we need to see more cards to fill up your Underworld, this card will be really good as a toolbox in Frost. If you can't fill up your Underworld easily, this is just a Nexus bank and a combo piece, which is fine. I think as a combo piece, it does fine with them Frost Sticks. Maybe with Frigid, where you can return the spirit you used to get Frigid back to your hand with. We need to see more pieces that work with it, more ways to get things into your Underworld. But I think it's going to be a decently good card, especially in these Frost combo kind of stuff. Frost little guy, Frost aggro stuff that might pop up with Mountains of Boreas. Komagma, I know this is really blurry, but it's a 4 attack, 1 fire cost Celestial with defense. When this Komagma receives 1 or more fire, you can draw a card, then discard a card. That's really good. This card is really good for a lot of reasons. Now, you can compare it to Ash Rabbit, as everyone does with card advantage stuff, and it's definitely worse than Ash Rabbit. But the upside is you can fill your Underworld with this card. Perhaps you're playing a Reanimator strategy with Rise from the Ashes. You can dump stuff in your Underworld, and then with Komagma, and then use Rise from the Ashes to bring it back. It's got a decent attack stat. Play it with Volcanic Forge perhaps and Valkyries, and now you have a 5 attacker that has some advantage, or at least filtering. Not really card advantage because you do have to discard that card, but it's filtering on a decent attack body. If you can get some receives on it, you can perhaps do some more Volcanic Forge pumping. I think you might tech it into the Frost decks to get stuff in your Underworld quicker. The best home I see for it is just going to be in some generic fire deck that might run Komagma. If like Fire Beatdown becomes a thing with Volcanic Forge, Valkyries, Komagma, etc., this will see play. If there's no deck like that that works, it'll probably just be a 1 or 2 of in some decks here or there for some synergies. We'll have to see what the rest of the set does, but it at least has Underworld synergy with Frost stuff and big stuff Reanimation synergies. Moving on. Cryoling. I don't think this is exactly up to date. This is an old image that I just had on me from the first reveal. But it's a 1/3 for 1 Frost. When it gets 1 attack for every Frost in your Underworld. If it has 6 or more attack, you must either destroy it or special send it to your hand or deck. I think it's specifically about... I think there's a phase restriction on it now or something. But this card is okay. If you can dump a lot of Frost Spirits, I mean, people are saying like, oh, I'll just mulligan 2 times start of the game and I'll get a 5 attack Frost Celestial. Or, oh, I'll mulligan a bunch of times and just play it and now I instantly get to ascend to Cryovern. I don't know what Cryovern does yet. That might not be worth it. So this card's interesting. It can be a decent attacker for a little bit. It kind of falls into the same traps though as like Pictorus and Valkyries, where you can Gorgon's Gaze in the battle step so that it loses its attack, but the battle still continues and it basically chumps itself. I don't think this card's going to be good in any kind of aggressive strategy, just because if you're playing only like 5 or 6 Frost and 3 Cryoling, well then eventually when you get your second Cryoling, the second and third Cryolings are going to blow up for Cryovern regardless, because you don't, or they won't get the attack buff. It's very clunky. So I don't see this card being super useful unless you're playing Cryovern, and Cryovern is good. Moving on. Lockagon. Awesome, super interesting card. Fun fact about the name of this card. I got to name this card because Dan was like, I don't know what to name this card. I was like, Loch Ness Monster. Lockagon. And there we go. There's the name, Lockagon. So it's a 2/6 for 2 water. This Lock-On gets 1 attack for each water in your underworld. When you return 1 or more water from your underworld to your spirit deck, you can target and destroy a card. So it's like Lock-On, but instead of casting apples and ambrosias, it's off recovery you get to pop stuff. Its stats are way worse though, unless you're including all the water spirits in your underworld, but you need to recover water spirits to use the ability, so you're either loading up your underworld with water spirits to give it a big attack, or recovering spirits to blow stuff up, making it kind of this risk reward card where it's like, do you want to let it sit in defense, potentially get knocked over by like a Tectorus? Do you want to sit in an attack position, try to keep its attack up, but not really pop stuff with its effect? I think this is best for its effect though, because if you can chain Ambrosias together, or special cast Sluggles with Rise from the Ashes, or Trotagwas with Rise from the Ashes from an Underworld, and do that like a couple turns, or a couple in a turn, you can potentially blow stuff up. It's going to be probably a little slower but more consistent than Lock-On to pop things, which is good. But I think Lock-On being a 7-8, which are massive stats, is a better stat line than a 2-6 that can pump itself. Because again, you fall into the trap of, if it gets Gorgon Gazed, it loses its attack and might just punch into something and blow itself up. So, awesome card. I think it's going to make a Water Nexus deck really relevant, where you can Nexus spirits to like Trotagwa with Aphros. You can ramp into it with something like Tadpuff, etc. Like, I think there's a lot of plays you can do with this card that is going to make a water control deck really viable. And I think this card is really good. Does still lose to Gorgon Gaze and Earthquake, but just like Lock-On, you play it, you try to board wipe, and move on from there. Moving on to Narpoon, a 4/3 for 1 water. When you normal cast this Narpoon, you can search your deck for 1 spirit, Frost Celestial, add it to your hand. It's a Frost Searcher consistency piece, good stats. In water is not super relevant, except for it gets past Tsunami, which is relevant. Searches for 1 spirit, Frost Celestials, consistency card for your combo decks, I guess, that I've been talking about. But that's about all it is. It's your standard searcher with decent stats. Searchers are only good if they have good stats or search an element, as we see in set 1. It has good attack stat, so it probably will see some play in a Frost water deck, or even a Frost focused deck where you need certain cards for a combo. Nemesis, 3/1 for 1 wind. When this Nemesis receives 1 or more wind, you return 2 wind from your underworld to your spirit deck. This card is exactly what wind needed. Wind is very expensive, it had no recovery. Now it has good recovery and a bunch of Nexus cards to go with it. I think Nemesis is going to be very strong, if not just okay. You're definitely running at least 1 or 2 in almost every wind deck, just for either the tutor with Aeolus. Perhaps you just play Aeolus with 4, get Nemesis right away just to recover spirits and make a board presence moving into some other play later in the game. Or late game, you just play it from hand to recover spirits, Nexus to it with Tower of Winds or Exaltair, get some burn, get some heal, all that jazz. So I think it's going to be very good. If it doesn't see play in every wind deck, it'll see play in every Wind Nexus deck, because this is a good Wind Receive card to go with P-Gust and Exaltair. Wind might just need one more good kind of Wind Nexus card, and it will be good as an Elestral, but we only have Exaltair right now, which is okay. It burns, it doesn't do anything for the board state, which makes Wind Nexus a little bit more fragile, but aggressive. Moving on, we're 2/3 through the way. Palelithic, I mentioned this guy earlier. It's a 3/1 for 1 Earth. When this Palelithic is destroyed in battle by an Elestral, by an opponent's card effect, you can search your deck for up to 2 Earth Elestrals that have the same name. You send 1 to your underworld and 1 to your hand. Now the way this is worded is, if you fail to find both Elestrals, you must always send the first card you find into the underworld. So if you find 1 card off this, which you technically can, you send it straight to the underworld. If you find 2, you will send 1 to the underworld, 1 to your hand. This is going to be decent with the Gigga Flora deck, where it'll get blown up. Maybe you run it into your opponent, you search for, let's say, a Tectorus, put 1 into your underworld, 1 to your hand, and then next turn you play like Gigga Flora, special send it to Gigga Flora right away, wait a turn, start popping Tectoruses into play. Stuff like that. So it's going to be a good, decent, consistency searcher, but I don't know if it's better than Rummagem. That's the bar, and that bar is pretty high, and element searchers are great. If Earth has more Underworld synergy, this card will be good to set up the Underworld synergies, while also potentially tutoring stuff to your hand. But if Earth doesn't have good Underworld synergies outside of Gigga Flora, this card's going to be pretty bad. So I would rather run Rummagem in most cases, but I could see a world where Palelithic is played. Next up, Platypulse. Say 1 something for 1 thunder. Elestrals that aren't thunder enchanted get, or not thunder enchanted get blah 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 blah. It's hard to read this card effect, but Elestrals that are not thunder enchanted get -1 attack for every enchanting thunder on your field, and the Elestrals named Platypulse cannot decrease their attack by more than 4, something like that. This card looks great, like, oh, you can slide into Thunder Nexus. It's too slow for Thunder Nexus. Reducing attack stat just means your opponents are going to go in defense. I think this card's really bad, but really fun. In theory, you play it with Zeus, and then you have this in play, so now your opponent's Elestrals are super weak, but this has the Rice-Saros effect, where you just put a Thunder Spirit on your card that you tech in, and then all of a sudden, Platypulse gets blown up because it's 1 attack. Unless it's got like a shit ton of defense, which it probably doesn't, or I can tell you it doesn't. This card's bad. It's really fun, but I don't think it's going to see play because there's so many ways to just not have to deal with it, like blowing up your blow up Zeus with Thunderstorm, or misenchant with a Thunder Spirit, or just play something with 5 attack and crash into it. Like, this card's not going to be good, and again, like, if you're focused on reducing attack stats to your opponent can just play stuff in defense, and you'll never be able to attack over anything with Platypulse with 1 attack if your opponent just drops up in defense. So it looks like it's a Thunder Nexus card, but I don't see this seeing play consistently in Thunder Nexus. Maybe as a one-of, as a weird tech option against like 5 attack, maybe. But I think it's a bad card. I don't think it's going to see play unless it's a sideboard option against aggressive decks. Maybe that's about it. Moving on, Scepter of Kione. I have the teaser image before we knew Kione was Kione. That's all I had on me. Scepter of Kione. Your Pirate Celestial gets 2 attack and 1 defense. That's it. Then, when Kione is enchanted and the Pirate Celestial destroys an Celestial in battle, you can special cast 1 spirit from your hand. So this synergizes with Kione really well, where you can return a spirit from your underworld with your hand, beat over something with Scepter, and then cast it right away. So again, Frost is this weird kind of underworld combo stuff. This doesn't need the underworld to combo with, so you can special cast stuff just by attacking over stuff with Scepter. But Scepter has no abilities like the other artifacts do. But its ability with its Divine Renown is really powerful. Special casting Elestrals into play is really good. The problem is you still have to beat over something with this card. It could be really fun in a bear deck, where you maybe give it to an Ursir, punch over something with an Ursir, get another bear out, and then special cast a bear from your hand, and now all of a sudden you have a bunch of bears. And if you have aDen out, you now just have a bunch of spirits, and your next turn you can just fill your board with other big bears and stuff. So, interesting card, really good effect, but because it's an artifact, will it be good enough? That's to be seen. Moving on, Glacier. These cards you've probably already seen. They're in the app already, but we'll talk about them because they're relevant for Frostfall. 14-4 for 3 Frost. This Glacier deals piercing damage. When this Glacier enters battle with an Elestral, you can suppress that Elestral. So piercing damage allows you to basically deal damage as if your opponent's Elestral was in attack position during battle. Decent. It's good because there's a lot of walls in Elestral. That's fine. It has no protection, which is bad for 3 cost. You can special cast it with aDen, which is good. The weird, interesting, possibly good part about this card is you suppress the Elestral permanently. As long as the Elestral is in play, it is suppressed. So the second this declares an attack and suppresses an Elestral, that Elestral will no longer have an effect until it leaves play either to hand or underworld and gets back into play. Which makes this card really good against something like Astrabbit walls, where if your opponent's trying to, just wall off, this blows up walls, it stops good effects. You can run this into other 3 costs that have effects to stop their effect. Like, this is a strong card. The issue is actually hitting your opponent, which will have in the Ursa deck, you'll have Chains, you'll have Helios Chariot Ride, Blizzard, Thunderstorm perhaps to really help you get Glacier in. Glacier is a glass cannon. It's almost in the name. So there's a lot of really good ways to get it out fast. There's some really cheeky ways in an aggro deck where you can play like Exaltair off Aeolus, Nexus Spirits to aDen with Exaltair. Burn for 2. Ursgotta doesn't care what spirits you disenchant from it. So you disenchant the 2 wind, 1 fire, 1 frost from it, and pop Glacier into play with your Exaltair, and then punch as well for even more damage. It's really expensive, but a really aggressive play, and if your opponent doesn't have a good back row at the moment, you're going to be able to do a lot of damage there. So that's interesting. There's really cool combos you can do with it. I think it's good enough to see some play in an Ursa deck, and that's about it. But that's not saying much because Ursas aren't that great. Abom and Ursa. This is the best Ursa in the game. A 3/1 that gets 1 attack for every other Ursa on the field. That's really good. So basically you have one other Ursa in play. It's a 5 attack Elestral. It's really easy to get Ursas into play with something like Ursmog, Urscout, etc. And there's some recursion. You can use Keone to get stuff to your hand. So I think Abom and Ursa will see a lot of play in Bears decks. And that's it because it's a bear card, but it's probably the best 1-cost bear now. Chilotl, also known as Bob. If you say anything other than Bob, unless when you're explaining the card to a new player, you're wrong. Its name is Bob. It's a 2/3 for 1 frost. You can cast Chilotl, Bob. Target 2 face down runes. As long as Bob is enchanted, those runes cannot be cast. This card currently is playable in set 1 because it was a promo from the Kickstarter. It sees 0 play, not because it's not because it's a frost card, there's not enough frost cards, it's because it's not a great card. Now with something like Enfrostix and ways to get this into your underworld easily, if we see those, this could be good in the kind of Enfrostix combo setup where you play Enfrostix, special cast Chilotl into play with Enfrostix, stop 2 runes from being able to be used, Keone back Enfrostix, go for Cutearant, do some shenanigans, go into Emperor or some other big 2-drop or 3-drop in Frost. So I think this will see some play in the Frost combo stuff with Enfrostix just because Enfrostix special casting this makes this a good card. Casting this from hand sometimes is relevant as well to just say, hey, you can't use those only 2 runes you have face down right now. So I think this card is going to see more play, or at least some play, because it sees no play right now. It will see some play in Frostfall as a tech card at least, or combo enabler, or defensive combo like preemptive card with the other Frost stuff we've seen, but we'll see where that gets to going forward. Then we have Frosmite. Oh, this card is way better than you think it is. Oh, sorry. This card is way better than you think it is. A 3/1 for 1 Frost that gives an Elestral -5 defense to unfazed. This blows up every single wall in the game. It is way better than it seems, and if it doesn't break the wall itself, it reduces defense, allowing other cards to now attack over the thing. So if you have 1 card in play plus Frostmite effect. Let's say Ash Rabbit's a 0 defense. Frostmite gets shielded. Okay, well now I'm going to attack you with my 1 attack Elestral and pop your rabbit anyway. Again, we've seen a lot of Frost combo stuff that lets you get lots of little Frost guys into play quickly. This will be good with those because you can play this card, break walls with your little guys, then start punching in. This card I think is going to actually see some solid play, if not main deck. It's a great sideboard deck against control decks that are playing lots of defensive Elestrals like Ash Rabbit, Panzer, Chautauqua, stuff like that. I love this card. I think it's better than people are giving it credit for. It's not just because Warmite and Wurtzmite. I promise, it's not just because I'm a stan. This card's actually better than it looks. Like Sleeper. Now I'm not saying it's an S tier card, but a lot of people are gonna look at this card and be like, it's like a DC tier. It's like a solid B+. Like, it's better than it looks. I love it. Moving on. Ursgotta, 2/3 for 1 Frost. When this Ursgotta is attacked during the damage step, you can turn the attacking Celestial to its owner's hand. So it's a shield on a body that's way cheaper. I think this card is good for a control stall deck. Not great in bears. It's good if you're trying to get to a 2-cost Frost Celestial because your opponent doesn't want to attack into this. They can still potentially suppress this with Gorgon's Gaze and punch over it. Or they can just bite the bullet and attack over it. But if they're attacking with like a Viserys, they'll still get their special cast Viserys into play with 1 going back to their hand. I think it's a good card, not great. If Frost gets good 2-drops, good 3-drops, it'll be relevant. As a 1-cost shield that your opponent can see coming a mile away, I don't think it's as relevant because your opponent can also just play more Elestrals behind this, and then once they're ready with a good board, then attack and let one thing get bounced, they don't care. They can basically just ignore this card and board as long as possible until they get board presence and then punch over it. So unless you have a way to support around this card, it's just going to stick board and your opponent doesn't do anything with it. You're just, maybe it saves you 2 or 3 spirits over the course of a game, which is relevant, but you're using a normal cast for it. I think it's good, not great. It might see play. I'm not surprised if it sees 0 play. I'm not surprised if it sees some play. I'd be very surprised if it sees a lot of play. Moving on to Ursgotta, 1/3 for 1 Frost. When you normal cast this Ursgotta, you can search your deck for an Ursa Elestral or rune and add it to your hand. So aDen is a Ursa rune. It has a subtype on it, so you can search aDen with this card, which is the best card used for this card. It's consistent card in bears. It searches bears and element effectively. I think it's decent. It'll be basically a 4 defense with aDen, which is a relevant defense line, not great. You will definitely see this being played in Ursa decks, at least 2 of, most likely, maybe a 1 of, just for the consistency tool. If you play like Ursmog and then special cast this, you don't get the effect. The fact this normal cast is limiting, but it's a decent card. Like, you can open turn 1 with Ursgotta and not feel bad about it. If you play Ursgotta on a second turn or third turn, you're going to feel a little rough, but hey, it's good. It's consistency. It'll see play in Ursa decks. Ursa decks aren't that great. Continuing. aDen, the card that Ursa's needed for the entirety of set 1. They 2-cost, Frost, Fire, Stadium Room. Ursa Elestrals get 1 attack and 1 defense. When a player casts an Ursa Elestral, you can enchant 1 spirit to this aDen. You can disenchant 4 spirits from this den in order to special cast 1 Ursa from your deck, and this card's treated with the Ursa subclass. That parenthetical text isn't there on the normal card, it's only there on the card in the game because they didn't have the ability to put Celestial subtypes on runes at the moment, but now they do, so that parenthetical text isn't relevant right now. But yeah, so this allows you to basically load up spirits on the board with Ursas. So you play this, then you play, let's say, Ursmog. You enchant spirit to this card. Then you special cast with Ursmog's ability any other Ursa. And now you have 4 spirits on aDen. You can crack aDen to go search a 3-drop, Glacier Ursa or Mad Ursa, or potentially any Ursa. You can go get a 1-cost Ursa if you really wanted to. And it's a way to basically make the 3-drops in Ursas relevant, but not great. So it costs 7 spirits to get those 3-drops into play, but they're pretty decent. Like, Mad Ursa will be a big stat stick with protecting the little cups. If you have like Abom Ursa and Ursier in play, your Mad Ursa is going to help protect them and be a big threat. So your opponent's got to get rid of Mad Ursa first, because they won't be able to target the little guys. And Ursas still aren't great with this card, but there's a lot of shenanigans you can do with the card, like I mentioned with Exaltair and Nexusing with it and all that kind of shenanigans. So the card's not bad. At worst, it's an Ursa-focused stadium, allowing you to pump up your Ursas and not other cards your opponent will be playing. So unless you're playing the mirror match, it only helps you, and not a ton of people play stadium room removal or stadiums in general right now. So you might just be able to play this and just have Ursas in play, which is super cool. And then moving on, Avalanche. I mentioned this quite a few times. It's a way to fill your underworld with Frost Elestrals by milling your deck yourself. Self-mill is good for underworld strategies. You could also potentially use this as a opponent mill deck and with Humbust. So this plus Humbust mills 5. Maybe you have another Frost Enchant Elestral in play as well, so you can mill 7 off of 1 Humbust trigger plus this card. Generally, you're going to play like a Frost deck where you play like Frigid Cub, play Avalanche, start milling cards from top of your deck to try to fill up your underworld for those combo synergies I've mentioned quite a bit right now. Unless we see more of these kind of effects in Frost, that deck will not work properly, but still has a place. I think this card is good for setup. Again, if you play this after a Frigid Cub, you can recover the 1 spirit that you used to cast this to the Frigid Cub right away as well with the Nexus. So I think it's a good card. Maybe turns Mill on to be a competitive deck, but I don't think so. I think some people tried to run it in the first app tournament with this card in it, and it didn't do well. So we'll see where it goes. But hey, Self Mill in Frost is going to be super useful for all those underworld synergies. Corbrol, 2/2 for 1 water. When you cast Corbrol, an opponent must reveal each face down on their field and destroy all non-counter runes revealed this way. This will stop bluffs if you're going for a combo turn like, say, Locagon or Lotagon or some other combo like the Frost combo stuff I've been talking about. This will be a good way to see what your opponent has, potentially clear up bluffs, prepare to hit stuff with Blizzard so you know what you're hitting and what you're not hitting. I think this is going to be relevant in control deck, and I think in a water deck you run at least one of these with Foamy, because you just play a Foamy gets cracked by your opponent, you go into Corbrel, you blow up their invokes, or at least get to see what they have face down, and then go into whatever your strategy is from there. So I think it's relevant. It will probably be one of the most water decks that can search it, and it might be a sideboard deck against, you know, invoke based decks like Fruit, where you can check to see what bluffs they have versus actual counter runes they have. It will also force people to be checked when they're playing against water to not play bluffs, which could mean that you're not playing bluffs, so your opponent can more freely target your face down runes and get, you know that the Blizzard's going to hit, know that the Thunderstorm's going to hit something relevant. So I think that's a cool, super cool card. Snow Waddle, it's 2/4 for 1 Frost. When you normal cast Snow Waddle, you can search deck for an Elestral with enchantment cost, Frost, Thunder, and add it to your hand. That sounds good. No idea what the Frost Thunder card is. So we're confirmed that there's 2 in the set. Dan has confirmed there's 2 in the set. But until you know what you're searching with this card's irrelevant. However, searching 2-cost Elestrals is something that we've been missing in the game. So I will say, searching a 2-cost Celestial sounds fantastic. But we don't know what the 2-cost Celestials are right now, so they could be really bad. But in the future, this card will potentially see more and more play. The more Frost Thunder Elestrals exist. It's got a 4 defense body, meaning it might stick on board to ascend with. Searching 2-cost Celestials, like to see more of that. This effect is alright, assuming the cards that it searches are good. Got decent enough body to survive maybe a turn. So I think it'll be relevant eventually, if not with the Frost Thunder that it's searching. Probably searches out its Ascension and one other card. We'll see what those cards are in the future. And then last but not least, Waspy. It's an 8/1 for 2 Earth. That's a really high attack stat, but Tsunami ruins it, right? However, I'm going to skip. Well, let me read the effect first before I get into the crazy stuff. When this Waspy is destroyed in battle, an opponent must expend 3. So don't attack into this. This Waspy is unaffected by counter runes if it ascended from Cyanectar. Gorgons can't target it. Tsunami can't change its position. Shield can't bounce it. This is just a big attack threat that just has an ability that says, I won't be affected by counter runes, assuming you get the Cyanectar Special Ascent. Cyanectar Special Ascent's again reminder off a Poison Arrow, Poison Nectar, Poison Tunic, 2 of which we don't know what they do yet. Poison Tipped Arrow is a good enough card to see play right now. Will that mean Cyanectar is played? Possibly. Assuming the other poisoned cards are good enough to see play, this will be a good card. If they are not good enough to see play, this card will be useless because it will be too inconsistent. However, an 8/1 2 cost makes it a really high attack stat for 2 cost. 8 is up there. And you can't destroy it in battle. So even if your opponent's Tsunamis this to punch it, you're taking a lot of damage. So you don't want to deal with this in combat in general. So you don't even want to like Tech Taurus into this because you're going to be burning yourself a lot. However, Earthquake exists, Boombet exists, Kinleo exists. There's ways to deal with this card. So it'll be good, I think, if the other cards are good enough. Otherwise, it's just maybe just something you ascend into, hard ascend into when your opponent's board is cleared, just so they're forced to blow removal on it. But then why would you just play another Viserys? The only thing I think you'll see play is if the poison cards are good, and it works in an Earth deck with those cards. So we'll see how that goes. But that will be the last card. So that's 36 cards revealed for Frostfall so far and their abilities. That's all of them. If you made it this far, hello, I am back to making content. Thanks for watching the whole video. It was very long. I see my timer right now of 54 minutes. Probably around there after some edits. Probably about the same amount of time. And yeah, dang, that was long. So hey, like and subscribe if you made it this far. I'm back to making content. Thanks for sticking around if you already are subbed and haven't seen content from me in like 2 months. Roll outro.